Good afternoon and welcome back to our story tree. We're in a different location in our beautiful church today because I wanted us to take a bit of a bird's eye view of the next couple of days. As we go back in time to nearly 2,000 years ago, we're remembering stories from history, things that happened, and we've written accounts to tell us from the Bible how they happened. And these stories are an attempt to look a little bit deeper into what went on behind the stories we're so familiar with. And so I want you to imagine, as we prepare for today's story, that we are back in the tight, closed-in streets of Jerusalem. There's a simmering energy. People have welcomed Jesus into the city. They've expected him to take over, to drive out the Romans. Things are getting a little bit restless, and it's very dangerous for Jesus and his disciples because there's a lot of people, particularly the Jewish leadership, who want to kill him. And even Pontius Pilate, the governor, the Roman governor, has heard about Jesus now, and even he is worried that this upstart may cause trouble in his province. So when we last met Jesus, he was in the entrance to Jerusalem on the donkey, and he came in and people were full of excitement, full of adulation, full of expectation. And of course, those expectations weren't met. Very soon after going into the temple, where he turned over the tables, where he drove out the money changers, those who were despised by the ordinary people because they overcharged and they cheated, he disappeared. He went back to Bethany. Some of the disciples began to wonder what's going on, especially Judas. Was this not the Messiah? Was he spending all his time following the wrong leader? Maybe after all his expectation, this Jesus wasn't who he thought he was. Meanwhile, Jesus was making preparations of his own. He wanted to celebrate the Passover with his friends. He wanted to celebrate in a particular way because he knew that what was going to be celebrated that night was going to be remembered for thousands of years. And so he said to his disciples to go into the city. And when they went into the city, they would meet a man carrying water on his head. Now, this is quite a unique thing because in those days it was the women who carried water on his head. So this man would have been easily recognizable. And they were to follow that man until he got to the house that he was going to. And then they were to say to him, "Where is the room prepared for our master?" It was kind of like a secret signal, a connection with this man to give them access to the upper room. And so he showed them up the stairs on the outside of the house into this upper room, and they began to make preparations. Bit by bit, the disciples started to arrive. Because they couldn't be seen together, they ended up coming in dribs and drabs and terrified. Very unsettled. This was not going the way they had expected. Things were changing too quickly for them. And they arrived and they all sat down around their table and even the normal social and ritual niceties weren't being observed. Nobody thought in the preparation to prepare a servant who would wash their feet. They'd all come in from the room, from the streets, and their feet were dusty and smelly. And it was part of the ritual preparation for this Last Supper for this Passover meal, that they would actually clean themselves and prepare for this holy festival. But they all sat there looking at each other, anxious, wondering what was happening. And Jesus arrives in. And you would think Jesus coming in would calm their hearts, but even that seemed to unsettle them more, because the first thing he did as he looked around and he saw what was happening, that they were all huddled in their own little worlds. They were all isolated from each other. And he realized that they hadn't even washed their feet. So he took off his outer garment and wrapped a towel around himself and poured water from the jars into the basin and brought it to his disciples one by one. Even Judas's feet were washed. Even the feet of the one who would betray him within hours were washed. Even Simon's feet were to be washed. And Simon was horrified. He said, "Lord, you can't do this. Don't wash my feet. This is for a servant, for a slave to do, not for you. You're the Lord, you're the Master, you're the teacher, you're the Messiah." And Jesus said to him, "If I don't wash your feet, you can have no part of me." And Peter realizes there's a deeper message going on here. He realizes that Jesus wants him to commit completely to him. and to surrender completely to him. And he says, Lord, don't just wash my feet, wash my hands, my face, my whole body. Cleanse me, clean me, prepare me. And Jesus smiles. I think he sees the impetuosity of Peter and says, it is enough that I just wash your feet. So what was Jesus doing? He was showing them that even though he was God, even though he was the Messiah, even though he was the master and the teacher, he was taking the form of a servant, of a very slave. He was humbling himself. He was surrendering his authority and his majesty, and he was washing his disciples' feet. And I don't think he was just dipping them into the water. I think he was actually scrubbing them. You know the way you've been learning now how to wash your hands and to keep them clean and to do a proper ritual. I think he was kneading out the grains of dirt from between their toes. I think he was saying to them, in the same way that I'm serving you and I'm washing your feet, what's going to happen in the next couple of days is actually going to wash and clean your soul, your very spirit, so that you can be with me in heaven. Thank you.